Hello, everyone. I'm Ari Lax, and this week I'm going to be recording with Todd Anderson's Temur Delver deck that he won the Modern Classic in Charlotte with a couple of weeks ago. This is kind of new, the new hot thing is to be the blue deck now that Twin is no longer there, which is funny because I remember a lot of people giving Eric Lauer a bunch of crap for saying, hey, we're trying to make a format where people play Temur Delver instead of Temur Twin. They're all like, Temur Delver's not good. Temur Delver then puts two people in top 16 of the first event. Historically, they do have a point. Twin has always been around, but Temur Delver has had basically two big finishes over the course of Modern. It won a very early Grand Prix, which realistically, people like the entire pod deck was legal and no one had it. Like you had, or was Melira not a card then? Let me think about that. Now Melira was definitely a card then, and Viscera was a card then, and Kitchen Finks was a card then, and Birthing Pod was a card then. No one had that deck. Restoration Angel was not a card, so admittedly they couldn't have that one yet. Also at the time, uh, yeah, just like people were still figuring out the format, and it was just cards that were good enough. And I think Antonino De Rosa may have played, or the Japanese GP I think was one of my like black white tokens with Hero Blade Hold to give you context at the time. But the other one was more recent, and that one was kind of more interesting because it was a modern Premier IQ last summer in Worcester, and that's where like the rise of this kind of came about. So people were playing all these Grixis Delve decks, not necessarily Delver, but Delve. So Gurmag Angler, Tassiger, and they had their Delve creatures, and the green one, it turns out, was good enough too. And unlike the Grixis Delve deck, you are unlike you don't have to play. The problem with the Grixis Delve deck is you can play maybe two Tassiger, two Gurmag Angler, and maybe cast the second one in a reasonable time frame. But drawing multiples is prone to flood. And in this deck, you get to play Tarmogoyf as your big idiot. So there is a bit of anti-synergy, but people play Tarmogoyf and Tassiger all the time. So you get to play a bunch of big creatures that are not terrible in multiples, which is kind of a draw. Um, you are lighter on Young Pyro because Tarmogoyf doubles up in the same slot. Also, the other thing is, there are lists that don't play Delver but play Young Pyro or whatever. Just some of the balancing here is in because Tarmogoyf is so good and a 2-drop competing with Pyro. Um, that's why there's less of that. Uh, you could have a list with more if Tarmogoyf was worse, but then if Tarmogoyf was worse, um, Mandrills is also not great. You just start going on this road where you're wondering why you're playing big creatures instead of, a different blue red deck with like Pia and Kira and Nalar. Um, the loss by playing green instead of black is creature removal. So this list is trying to exploit Vapor Snag. Vapor Snag Snagcaster Mage has been a good thing since its standard days. Um, Unshockingly, Mana War they lose a life is good when you've already bounced one of the things. You do get to play some Dismember, one, maybe two total in the 75 on a good day. But you can't play a ton of that, so opposing Goyfs are going to be an issue, but if the expected metagame shifts the way it does, which is a drop in Jund because you don't want to play Jund or Abzan, because they don't want to play against Eldrazi or Tron, and they don't have Twin to prey on, then this kind of removal is a lot better because you don't have to kill these things. Cantrips, less Thought Scours because you aren't as all in on Delve, and this card's not actually that good then, and it makes you more graveyard reliant, or induces you to be more graveyard reliant to make it good. Not a ton of probes. Life loss is kind of an issue. There's not a lot you can do with the info in this deck. You don't have a lot of like direct answers. You just kind of kill their thing and are playing a tempo game. Not too much lining up of everything. So the info is less valuable than it would be with like Infect, where you're like, oh, I have to beat these 3 removal spells, so I sequence this, this, and this, and then they take 10 and they lose. But Max Serum Visions because this card is great. Moving on to the interactive spells. For Remand, that's the draw of being blue-red, is basically that you get to be a Remand deck. While Twin was the Remand deck, this is now a Remand deck. You're coming out underneath Remand is one of the big things. That's why Goyf is so good. You can play Goyf and then Remand still in the early game. Whereas Tasker kind of bridges you into this weird mid-game where you're playing it and then remanding their stuff or whatever, which isn't that great. Lots of Spell Pierce. I don't know how I feel about this card. I'm interested to see how it plays out. I've been relatively middling on it, but if this deck is low to the ground as I think it is, it could be really good. I've liked this card in Affinity before, so that's a similar kind of shell. Is It Charm kind of ties the room together. I think there was a point in the past where Michael Jacob, when this card was first printed actually, he was playing Jeskai Delver, and his deck had one Faithless Looting because he needed action, like cards that fills with action, one Pillar of Flame because he needed another removal spell, and one Spell Pierce because he needed another counter spell. And then they printed this card, and he's like, oh, wait, this is all of those. That's great. So this card does work, kind of fills out your numbers a little bit. Mutagenic Growth, I'm not sold on. The big play for it is winning Tarmogoyf Wars or pumping Hootie Mandals over Goyfs or protecting Insectile Aberration from Lightning Bolt. But I'm not a huge fan of it. You can see it going. There are a lot more lands than I thought in this deck. 20 feels like a lot. Though you have more action, a lot of lists play like 11 cantrips, and you run into this issue where you just filter into your higher percentage. You have effectively 52 cards in your deck, or whatever. If you have 4 probes, 4 scours, and of those 52 cards, your deck's 20 lands out of 52 feels like 8 out of 60. I haven't done the math off the top of my head, so 1/7 of 20. So that's basically like about the same as 23 or so in a 60 card deck, which is a big increase. With less cantrips and more action, that's less of a problem, but it still feels like a lot. And this is the thing that feels like a lot to me, is all of these fetchable lands. I don't really know if you need Double Island. Well, Double Island I can see, Forest Mountain I get. But like all these duels, I'm not so sure on. But I'm willing to see how the mana plays out to start. Moving to the board, Spreading Seas is the best land removal for this deck. You're not really gonna Ghost Quarter people. You are light on land. I mean, saying you're light on lands, you could board in Ghost Quarter as a spell, but just having the velocity of an extra card is pretty key here. Unlike Merfolk, you don't have the exploits for it being an island, but still kills an Urza's Tower, still, effectively negates a lot of what Ivuggen's trying to do. Dispel, I'm shocked there's not more. This card's great. No idea what Surgical Extraction is trying to do, but it's just good against some things. Threads, again, I stated there's a lot of issues with Goyf here. Roast, Goyf sometimes falls out of roast range. That's just life. Their Liliana dies or whatever. And Threads is a much bigger beating against it. Gutshot, great against Affinity and Infect. Just a cheap spell in this deck that's really just about tempo and velocity and getting somewhere quickly with your cards before they get outclassed. And Gutshot does a lot of that work. Lavamancer takes out all the creature decks, and then Ancient Grudge because everyone hates Affinity and they deserve what happens to them. Overall, I like the shell of this deck. I'll have to play it so I can figure out what it's missing, but it feels like there's something missing, and I don't know if it's cards that don't exist or if it's just marginal shifts in terms of cards that you can play that fill specific holes.